Hello, my beautiful, wonderful children here. I found an article online that I found to be interesting and I want to go through. This article's been getting a lot of buzz, a lot of love, and I find its assertion to be rather silly. It's just kind of wrong on almost every point it tries to make, and I want to just go through and break down point by point everything I disagree with about it. So putting it up next to my face, make sure there's room right here. It's called Every TV Show Trying to Be the New Game of Thrones and Why They Won't Be. First thing is it says every TV show, and it lists like six, I think, and one of them is sci-fi, which is Westworld, which would be fine because Westworld, I guess, is trying to be the next Game of Thrones, even though it's already out. But the problem with that is it then goes on to say that the problem with one of these shows not being the next Game of Thrones is that people will be tired of fantasy. So, ready right off the bat in your title and your shows you've picked, you have not every. There's nearly 90 total IPs that are fantasy or sci-fi that are coming down the road. Many of them already in production you did not list here. And two, one of them's not fantasy, although you then go on to assert that it can't be a fantasy show to replace it. So what are you trying to go for here? There's a problem. Moving on from there, it lists the shows. It does a fine job going into the shows. That's whatever. But then it goes to its closing point of why there won't be a new Game of Thrones. And there's a few paragraphs here. In summation, basically it says that Game of Thrones is this huge cultural touchstone with its ending, and we'll never see that many people view a show again. We will never have a show become as big as Game of Thrones. And they attribute it to a couple things. One, too many streaming services. The audiences are going to be way too split, and so you'll never see these kind of numbers pulled in again. And then on top of that, you have it saying that the next show, as I previously mentioned, will not be a big fantasy show because instead people are going to be looking for something else, using the example of Lost transition to Breaking Bad as like the big king of television, which I disagree with. Lost died many seasons before it ended and had just not been a big thing, and then there were other huge shows, and then Breaking Bad came along, but okay, weird assertion, but cool. But I just fundamentally disagree with this idea for many reasons. First and foremost, Game of Thrones ending was big, no doubt. I actually have the numbers pulled up here. On the actual ending, Game of Thrones pulled in 19.3 million viewers. That's huge, right? That's a cultural touchstone moment, except it's totally not. Shows have been pulling in those kind of views for a long time and much, much bigger. The series finale of Friends had more people watch it. Hell, the series finale of MASH still holds the record as the most viewed episode of television on its air date in history. That is with 106 million people watching that series finale. Not even close. Blows it completely out of the water. So the idea proposed here that, oh, Game of Thrones was the last and we'll never see 20 million viewers on something again, I find to be absurd when the actual conclusion should be, oh, television on the scale of 100 million viewers died a long time ago, and 20 million viewers is cute to think it's that big. But I do think it's also wrong in saying that we'll never see a show get 20 million viewers on its opening or final ever again, because one, yes, a lot of streaming services are coming down the road. Trust me, I've been covering that. I'm working on episode 2 of the streaming wars right now. But we are already seeing so many of these streaming services fail, tie in with one another, or just merge. Like Hulu and Disney Plus are going to essentially be a part of each other. Disney bought Hulu. I think we're going to see a couple years of rough and tumble. Who's going to be on top? Maybe as long as a decade if we're really pushing it. But then, like with broadcast television, the winners will clearly emerge, and then they will dominate. And you'll split your bill between the 5 to 10, depending on how many there are and how many you want to buy, who are actually on top. So no, I do not think viewers will be so insanely fractured that we never see tens of millions of people watch an episode of television again. I just find that to be a silly assertion because we might not for a year or two because things are about to get more fractured, but things will settle again as they always do in media. And this whole premise is kind of wrong because people are probably, in my opinion, after all the research I've done, willing to pay for 5 or 6 streaming services because you're still at that point paying as much as you were for your cable package, not that much more, even if you did add a couple more on there. So let's say everyone keeps their Netflix subscription, which, by the way, if you want to talk about people who have the potential of watching at that level, HBO currently has 140 million subscribers worldwide. Netflix has 139. So right there, already they could trounce Game of Thrones in terms of people who absolutely have access to watch a finale of their television. No problem. And Hulu has 25 million, and they're considered one of the weakest of the streaming services that are huge and successful. Like, they're huge compared to most of the people who are trying to come up right now, but compared to HBO and Netflix, they're not on the same level. But they're also merging with Disney Plus, so they're probably going to shoot up, and then we're going to have these 3 kings, Amazon Prime, 4 kings, and then from there, it's very questionable, and it'll be questionable whether or not any of the others are even worth buying into if you're not just in a niche viewer group, like the DC streaming service that's out there. They can make money and profit with their very select number of shows and the smaller audience they have. They do not have near the numbers of a Hulu, and they're still profitable though. They're still making money, but that doesn't detract from like a Netflix, because someone who's watching this DC streaming service is not going to cancel their Netflix subscription over it. You're hitting a very different part of the market and need for a person, because someone watching this DC streaming service does not probably view it like their Netflix. They view it because they love DC. They have to have this thing. It's like their comic book subscription or something along that line. It is in no way in the same vein as someone who purchases a Netflix subscription, which is way huger of a catalog. And I just find this article to be wrong on almost all accounts. We're gonna have some weird decades in the future for sure, but no, all these streaming services that are coming up, most of them will fail, just like all these fantasy adaptations coming down the road. Half of them to 2/3 of them won't even have a pilot, and then the ones that do have a pilot, half of those will fail, if not more, and then we'll have the successful ones take on from there. Yes, there will be oversaturation. That is for sure true. But things survive. The Western genre had way too many copycats of the few successful Westerns, but it didn't kill the entire Western genre altogether. We still get the occasional Western gem coming out. It's just the cycle that these things breathe through and go through. So if you're one of the people who read this article and thought, oh my God, no, all of fantasy is going to die because this person at Screen Rant, which is a successful, interesting website that I do view because of my fantasy news segment, pulled from, they're just not accurate when it comes to the numbers, because most people, it's been shown, are willing to have multiple streaming services. Netflix and HBO currently now, even while they're still growing, have the base to trounce the Game of Thrones finale. I don't agree with pretty much any of this. I mean, if they were saying specifically, we will never see fantasy pull these numbers again, they might have some kind of argument, but again, I entirely disagree, because I suspect Lord of the Rings TV show might beat these numbers if it's good and pulls in a lot of people, or Witcher might if it's good and pulls in a lot of people, because this article does not even address the fact that Game of Thrones is a remarkably unapproachable show to a huge amount of potential viewers. And I don't mean that as a criticism on Game of Thrones. I really don't. It's a beautiful, spectacular show, but it's specifically for adults, and those are the ones who are most likely watching it. Kids are not watching it. TV shows that have a kid market will blow these numbers out of the water. That's just true. If HBO right now is at like the R rating. They're known for that. If you come in with a show that's more like the PG-13 realm, easy to crush these numbers. So I just find across the board, no, I'm sorry. I fundamentally disagree with this article. And this is from someone who does think we're about to get way too many streaming services, way too many fantasy adaptations. The successful ones will still thrive, because Game of Thrones, I just think the biggest takeaway for Game of Thrones is that maybe, and this, you have to add all these asterisks on there for it to be a correct statement, maybe we will never see a purely adult marketed fantasy TV show on a streaming service with this much blood, gore, nudity, and violence and language pull in those numbers again. Maybe. But we still could. Because yes, these streaming wars will happen. Yes, it will be huge and dramatic. Companies will fall, companies will merge, but they'll even out. It's not going to be a situation where we have 100 successful streaming services, because that is not sustainable at all. Instead, the big boys will win, smaller companies will be bought. It's that simple. Anyway, guys, that's just my response to this article. Game of Thrones had a very big finisher for the type of show that it is on the service that it is, but many other shows have had way bigger closers, and with the ones coming down the road being more accessible to a wider market and streaming services still just gaining subscribers like mad across the board, and the market not being saturated yet with the number of streaming services, and already there being signs of a lot of them merging, I just don't see this to be accurate at all. The only reason I felt the need to respond to James Hunt's article here, which I will link down below, it is worth checking out, is because I've seen this posted everywhere. It's on Twitter. It's people are really talking about it, and I found it to be just wrong. Just fundamentally, no. I'm sorry. Hard disagree, James. I like what you're trying to do, but if you look at the numbers, I think we might have 5 years of television being rocky. But no, not. We're never gonna see these numbers again. Although that sure probably made a great headline. Anyway, guys, like and subscribe if you've not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. And have a good one, y'all. Peace. Patreons. Epoch. Ryan Ratchford. Leighton White. There's so many names. Nolan Greene. Ryan Douglas. Dax Dibble. Gilad S. Your S gets its own line. Josh Rowe. Vex. So many Patreons.